Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to talk about politics. So, does earning £100,000 a year, or $132,000, or €113,000 make you poor? It puts you in the top few percent of earners in Britain, but the right wing are claiming poverty on this income. Are they right? Let's see. What do you mean you already know the answer? So anyway, it's the final stretch in the run-up to the budget, which means it's time for Tories to come out of the woodwork and claim that earning six-figure incomes doesn't make you rich. This is, of course, because Labour have been clear that some taxes have to increase in order to catch up with investment in our economy and society, which the Tories completely abandoned, but that some people need shielding from the extra burden. Labour have described these people as ordinary working people, defined as those on low to middle incomes during last year's election campaign, and more specifically this month as those under £46,000 a year. But the right wing aren't all that keen on taxes typically, or at least not paying taxes themselves. They don't really mind if poorer people pay it. So now they're trying to come up with ways of describing wealthy people as struggling, which is a complete dead end of an argument because Labour are not trying to claim that they're protecting everyone who might be struggling more than they did a few years ago. They're just protecting those who are struggling the most. However, some of the claims are fairly ludicrous as well as hypocritical. Let's take a look at the situation, shall we? And then as a little bonus, I've got some great tips from the Tories themselves as how you can manage on a tight budget of £100,000 a year. I mean, if they think it works for those on half the average income, it should certainly work for those on double, right? So one claim, which seemed to take off this weekend, it's still doing the rounds now, it's hilarious, was that earning £100,000 a year doesn't make you rich if you live in London. Actually, it does, even in London. Yes, the cost of living is generally most acute in the capital. I went to London last week. I had lunch at a pub there, cider and a burger. It's quite nice. I told my wife how much it cost and she asked what interest rate I managed to get on the bank loan. Living in London is expensive, absolutely. But for someone on £100,000 a year, no. First, that is over the double the median income for people living in London. So if £100,000 is a struggle, what about those on less than half that amount in London? How are they coping? And as I say, the median income is by definition, that's the halfway point, remember, just to be clear. So half of the people living in London are earning less than the median, which means half the people living in London are living on less than half of that £100,000 a year, which apparently is a struggle. For some, it will be much less. The minimum wage is active in London like it is everywhere else. How do they manage? Remember, the definition of poverty is earning 2/3 or less of the median income. So if earning a third less than the median makes you poor, earning double the median definitely makes you rich. And that is the median for London. Also, just objectively, £100,000 allows you to live comfortably anywhere in this country, including London. You can even afford to rent on your own and still pay for everything. That's the definition, basically, of rich. Yes, if you earned £100,000 a year in most parts of Britain, you would be better off. Like you would have more left over to save for a mortgage or retirement. Like being a northern monkey on £100,000, that makes you better off than a southern city slicker on the same amount, sure. But having less disposable income than in some parts of the country doesn't make you poor. What makes you poor, or even struggling, is being unable to afford the essential costs of living, or at least the expected costs of living. Even in London, that is not the case on £100,000 a year. Taking off taxes and the average London rental of £2,700 a month, that would still leave you with £3,000 a month take home. That is more than most people have before they've even taken the cost of accommodation and taxes anywhere in the country. These people are living on another planet if they think six-figure incomes put you in the struggling category. It actually puts you comfortably inside the top 5% of earners category. However, the bleeding hearts think it's a struggle. I don't like to see people struggling, so let's help them out. Happily, the cost of living has been an issue for a few years now. And it was an issue a few years ago whilst they were running the country. They had some helpful tips for people on way lower salaries to get them through tough times. Let's see what they came up with. First of all, very famously, cancel Netflix. Second, stop having holidays. Third, stop having kids if you can't afford them. Oh, but also you must have more kids because reasons. Fourth, buy large quantities of oats to eat and nothing else. Oh, you can live quite happily on 30p a meal, don't you know? Fifth, if all that's not enough, just get a better job. This is what the right wing were saying just 2 years ago when people on genuinely low incomes were struggling. There was no sympathy shown then for the cost of living or demands that the government they supported do something to help them. No, just those 5 pieces of advice. I say fire them right back at them. However, dozy arguments aside, it is worth pointing out there is nonetheless a serious discussion to be had about taxes because there is an economic cost to increasing taxes, wherever you increase them. We know that where you get particular breakpoints, where your income tax goes up a lot, people take on less work. Tax lawyer Dan Needle has been pointing this out this weekend with evidence. It is happening. So what we really need is perhaps a smoother level of taxation. For example, when you go above £50,000 or a little bit above it, the income tax on the excess jumps from 20% to 40%. Now that still leaves you with more money, of course. I think it's a bit mad to turn down work because your tax rate jumps up, but nonetheless, you can't argue with the way people think. For example, if you're on a decent income of, say, £25 an hour, as you cross over that tax threshold, you're suddenly going to be paying an extra £5 an hour in income tax. Now, in reality, it's not actually that bad because your national insurance rate comes down at that point. Because national insurance is actually really a very regressive tax where the poorest pay the highest rate for some reason. So if you combine income tax and national insurance, because they are both taxes on income, if you just combine them together as one percentage, as you go across that threshold at just above £50,000, your £25 an hour will go from being taxed at 28% or £7 an hour to 42% or £10.50 an hour. In terms of your take home, which is what you're actually bothered about, you go from taking home £18 an hour to £14.50 an hour. Now, most of us would still think that's worth our while. I mean, I am just about on a 6-figure sum with what I do these days. And I do extra videos at times for less than that. Maybe what these people need is a spell on a genuinely tough income. I remember having only £6 a week for food many years ago. That certainly stops you being entitled when it comes to attitudes to money. But some people don't see it like that. It appears to be a genuine phenomenon that people do actually turn down work just because of the extra rate of tax, even though that means they're losing out on what is still a significant amount of money in their pocket. And above £100,000, you get a similar thing because you then start to lose your personal allowance. So arguments aside from left and right, we could certainly do with a simpler tax system and preferably one without lots of cliff edges, which is a fact. You know, when you put a tax on something, you do dissuade people from doing whatever you are taxing. Indeed, sometimes there is a deliberate strategy. You put high taxes on tobacco to encourage people to smoke less and preferably not at all. So governments know that taxing something reduces economic activity in that area because sometimes they openly use taxes to suppress commerce. Smoking, as I've just said, or imports in the case of Trump's tariffs. At the other end of things, pension contributions are tax-free to encourage it. Or they're supposed to be. Apparently, Rachel Reeves might be looking at that as well. But the single greatest contribution to tax receipts in the UK is income tax and national insurance. That accounts for a combined total of 46% of all taxes collected in 2023-24. But that is taxing work, which we want to encourage. If we add taxes paid by businesses, it goes above 50%. Now, I'm not saying, as some are, that we need to stop taxing work and tax other things instead, because some things are harder to tax and some things are all but impossible and what's left wouldn't be enough. We need to generate a certain amount of tax to keep the economy chugging along. And when nearly half of all tax revenues come from taxing direct work and more than half comes from productivity in general, you have to adopt one of two opinions. The first is you are going to actively suppress your economic growth because people don't like taxes, and there's evidence that people do lower their productivity to avoid taxes, even though it means they get less money too. Yeah, I don't get it either, but it's still a fact, just like people wanting sprouts at Christmas. The second is we should try to reduce the level of tax on work with an increased level of tax on things which don't benefit us, but will probably not stop if we tax it more. And yes, that's another pitch for land tax. So there is a genuine discussion to be had on tax choices faced by the government. Almost every tax comes with an economic cost. But if there were no taxes, you would have no economy either. The UAE, people go, oh, about Dubai, UAE, they get away with it, almost no taxes, because the state owns the vast natural resources that they are selling to the world. And their government spends almost nothing on public services. You have to pay for it yourself. But the Tories, who admire countries like that, they gave away our natural resources to multinationals instead of selling it themselves. We don't sell the oil and gas from the North Sea. Multinational oil companies do. We gave them licenses for it. So the Tories have only got themselves to blame. They didn't want to nationalise our natural resources. What's going to happen? It's a no pain, no gain situation. So the debate should really be about what produces the most gain for the least pain. But it isn't. It's a pointless argument by people on the right trying to argue that earning 3 times the median income makes you poor, and on the left that it's somehow easy to tax the rich in a way that literally nobody else in the world has managed to do, including actual communists who have attempted it. One side arguing that only the rich should pay tax, the other that only the poor should pay tax, and hardly anyone saying, should we just take this seriously? But let me know what you think in the comments below, and please subscribe to the channel for more content. Thanks for listening, and until next time, I'll see you later.